Greetings and welcome to my podcast. My name is Peter Doherty. I'm a Catholic priest and a psychologist who has integrated my training in psychology and scripture studies to help understand the Gospels from a psychological, human perspective and seek out new pastoral teachings for Christians in these modern times. My podcasts are usually between 7 to 10 minutes in length, where I will share insights and reflections on what I hope will be useful to you. Please don't hesitate to contact me with questions or comments. Love to hear from you. Today's podcast is from Mark chapter 9, verse 30 to 37. This gospel will be read in churches on September the 22nd, 2024. In this gospel, we have Jesus talking to his disciples about his eventual death. I don't know for sure, but I suspect this gospel took place towards the end of Jesus' time with his disciples. It must have been difficult for Jesus talking about the end of his mission, and Jesus is trying to prepare them for what lies ahead of them. I suspect learning that his disciples were arguing about who is the greatest must have been particularly difficult for him to hear and to bear. There was likely so much he wanted to teach them, and here they are acting like children, arguing about who was the greatest. Jesus, the true teacher, turns this into a teaching moment. He first makes it clear that those who seek leadership for their own sake are the farthest from Christian teaching. Of course, Christians are not to shun leadership, but Jesus gives them a clear view of what Christian leadership is all about. Considering their childish discussion about who is the greatest, it's not surprising that Jesus talks about receiving the message like a child. When we think of children, we stereotypically see them as innocent and trusting. These two characteristics are critical for our faith to grow. And I believe Jesus is understanding innocence as having no malicious intent. Jesus was very clear in his understanding of leadership. For example, his teachings on leadership are found in Matthew chapter 20, verse 26, where he states, "But among you it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant." This reflects the principle that true leadership is about serving others rather than seeking power or authority. We see this theme again in John chapter 13, verse 13 to 17, where Jesus washes the feet of his disciples. Jesus explains, "You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If then I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also must go and wash one another's feet." This act of humility serves as a model of how leaders should treat those they lead, reinforcing the idea that leadership is rooted in service and love for others. I will speak about humility again in a future podcast, but I want to point out that Jesus' teaching about leadership involves a deep sense of humility. In the Gospel of Mark, chapter 10, verse 43 to 45, Jesus teaches, "Whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant." This teaching contrasts sharply with the common leadership models of authority and control prevalent in our society today. And Jesus called them to him and said to them, "You know that those considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be a slave. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." We see this in Mark chapter 10, verse 42 to 45. Humility is a virtue and is expressed in various ways. Leaders are meant to serve those they lead. Rather than see service as common, less honorable, Jesus moves service to be one of the highest virtues. Perhaps to live this teaching, we would do well to reflect on the people who work behind the scenes for us. When I was teaching at a small college, one of my bonus exam questions was to name one of the university cleaning staff. This question is deliberate, designed to encourage the students to pay attention to all people, especially those behind the scenes who have been often overlooked but are important in our society. Being sensitive to everyone will lead them to be better leaders. It's sad when one sees good people put in positions of authority only to have the power go to their head. They no longer listen, but are seduced by power, and come to believe that they alone have the answer. They become so task-orientated that they no longer see the needs of the people they work with, nor the needs of those entrusted to them. I think many people evaluate themselves by what they do, rather than who they are. There are several reasons why the wrong people get into leadership. For example, I'm going to introduce you to the Peter Principle. It is a management theory formulated by Dr. Laurence J. Peter, who proposes that in a hierarchical organization, employees are promoted based on their performance in their current roles until they reach a position where they no longer are competent. This phenomenon occurs because the skills that contribute to success in one job do not always translate to success in higher level positions. As a result, individuals often find themselves in roles where they lack the necessary skills, leading to what is termed as their level of incompetence. Often, people in leadership lack training in leadership and thus rely on their own personal experience, bias, and view of leadership. They will likely not be open or even aware of other leadership styles that could bring about the positive change they are seeking. Sometimes poor leadership comes from a lack of trust, either by the leader, those being led, or both. Negotiations become more adversarial than necessary. Communication becomes strained. Rebuilding trust takes time. But I urge Christian employers to work at showing their employees that they are trustworthy and are sincerely interested in their employees' well-being. Jesus proposed a style of leadership that may seem unworkable or maybe even naive, but I challenge leaders to consider the model that Jesus proposes and work towards it. Fortunately, many companies like those in the computer industry offer many benefits and employee supports, but there is still much to be done in the service industry, retail, and construction industries. If you are in a position of leadership, I urge you to look at your own leadership style and see if you could develop a more service-oriented model of leadership that better reflects your faith. Thank you for listening. I invite you to join me next week when I examine the Gospel of Mark again, who describes Jesus' teaching about being passionate in your faith. If this is the first time you've heard my podcast and you are interested in hearing more, I urge you to listen to my podcasts listed on the website. Every Sunday, I release a new podcast focusing on the gospel for the following week. I invite you to listen to all the podcasts, and I hope the reflections will be useful to you. The podcast, A Psychologist Looks at Scripture, is found in most of the platforms that carry podcasts. The podcast is also available on YouTube. Please do not hesitate to leave a review. Feedback from my listeners can be helpful in the development of the podcast. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank my team, Heather Patel-Doherty and Richard Coulombe, who play an important part in the preparation of this podcast. If you have any questions or concerns, I can be reached by email at peter.doherty, DOHERTYOMI, @gmail.com. God bless and have a great week.